preview. This is a long-ass preview. And we are live. Welcome to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve Poikinen. I am here in beautiful Boulder Creek, California, where the flannel shirt is our state flag, the pit bull is our state bird, and cannabis is our state flower. I am joined this Sunday morning by my friend and co-host from the Action for Assange Vigils, Taylor Hudak, because Elizabeth Voss had to reschedule, and we will be doing that interview on Friday before Consortium News Live goes on the air. So she gets to be really busy, and I get to be a little bit more relaxed. I'm not sure how that worked out, but it worked out. Taylor, welcome back to the show, and thank you for coming on short notice.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I sent you over. What the hell? Never mind. I sent you over a couple of things to talk about this morning. And the first thing that I want to discuss, because it's solidly in our wheelhouse, is a denial by the British court to look at or accept or incorporate into Julian Assange's case a medical appeal filed by Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on torture. And I'm pulling some shit up right now.
Okay.
But you can jump in whenever you want with whatever you want.
Yeah, so basically what happened was on Friday, Nils Melzer made a request for there to be a medical appeal for Julian Assange because, of course, his medical condition is getting increasingly worse. And, of course, this was yet another blow in his defense where this request was denied. I'm not too surprised by this, of course, considering that the UK government has failed to even address the original report that concluded that Assange was being subjected to torture. So I think this kind of aligns with what has been happening for the past several months in this case.
And this article coming out of Australia says nearly next to nothing. All we really get are two quotes from Nils Melzer, but they are heavy with fact and heavy with reality, and it's something that I feel like despite our best efforts, despite the best efforts of several other people who have been dedicated to spreading awareness about Julian Assange, it's not sinking in yet. Melzer says, what we've seen from the UK government is outright contempt for Mr. Assange's rights and integrity. Despite the medical urgency of my appeal and the seriousness of the alleged violations, the UK has not undertaken any measures of investigation, prevention, or redress required under international law. And this is key because at the moment, the UK still has to operate, yes, within their own legal system, but they also have to adhere to European Union law and international law while they're trying people who aren't citizens of their country.
Yeah, you're exactly right. But I think, again, too, there is no repercussions for not following international law in this case. And I think there's a reasonable debate to be had as to whether they're using the law to their advantage or they are just outright ignoring traditional procedure. I tend to think it's a mixture of both, but predominantly the latter. But again, it is a very short report that we're talking about right now, which again is coming from, I believe, news.com Australia. And there are just a few quotes, as Steve was saying earlier, that are coming from Melzer. So he again is expressing a deep concern to the fact that this is being largely ignored. Again, like I said earlier, I'm not too surprised by this because the UK has been able to essentially get away with this for some time now. and they know that the repercussions of his seeking medical help will only be a benefit to his defense. So I think that's, obviously why this is being ignored and these requests are being denied.
And you're right. It's the direct evidence and conviction of the CEO of the Spanish security firm who was spying and sending live feeds to the CIA. That's not admissible in this case. And when the UN rapporteur on torture, a man who, let's be honest, has seen some shit, right? Like
Right.
you don't get that job unless you familiarized yourself almost exclusively with that topic. For him to come
He's an
forward,
expert in torture.
yeah. For him to come forward and express these concerns, these legitimate, rational, rooted in basic human observation and expert in your field observation concerns, for them to be dismissed out of hand by this by the UK government, shows to me that not only are they not acting in the best interest of the rule of law, we didn't think that was going to happen in this case anyway, but that they're not operating under their own auspice. They're operating under the auspice of the United States, the national security state, and the CIA specifically.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I'm glad that you're bringing that up because a lot of this does have to do with U.S. pressure. As we know, the UK is they're obligated to respond to this to the original report from May that concluded that that Assange was being subjected to torture. They're obligated to do so, and they're not even adhering to their own standards that they signed onto. I can't remember the exact name of the agreement, but there's a specific term for it, and they've just been outright ignoring it. And that is essentially because of U.S. pressure. Again, we know that this is, of course, a coordinated effort between the United States, the UK, Ecuador, Sweden, and Australia hasn't been of much help in this case as well. However, recently, some MPs did get together to kind of create a coalition. But other than that, this has been a very strategic effort, and the United States has been at the very top of this and kind of manipulating everything that's been happening in this case.
Yeah, to read the article from I think it was Craig Murray, and we discussed it on the vigil a couple of weeks ago, where Craig Murray was like, "Yo, I was skeptical that he was being tortured. I didn't think that this was going to, I'm the last person that would have rushed to judgment on this. For him to be in the courtroom and witness not only the physical state of Julian Assange, but the way that UN State Department officials were dictating not only to the prosecution but to the judge herself how the proceedings were going to go. Why that hasn't raised every red flag available and why there isn't a red flag factory working overtime making more just so they can be raised as well is beyond me. We've got
Yeah, I agree.
we've
During
got
the break,
oh, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say you're right because we know that there were at least 5 U.S. representatives that were present during the hearing. I believe that they did have a right to be there. However, Craig Murray noted that during a court recess, the prosecutors hurried and rushed to speak with the U.S. representatives, and it was very obvious from those who were present in the courtroom, including Craig Murray, that the prosecution was taking its cues from U.S. representatives and then using that information and conveying that to the judge or to the magistrate, Vanessa Baratzer, who was then siding very closely with the prosecution side. So basically, it was the U.S. that was dictating what was taking place during that hearing.
You hear stories about kangaroo courts that took place during the colonial heyday of both the British Empire and the early U.S. Empire, where everyone involved, from the judge down to the bailiff, was bought and paid for, was playing a part with little to no enthusiasm in some cases and extreme enthusiasm in others, that it was conducted not so much as a show trial, but even a parody of a show trial, where it's almost like the Holy Roman Empire with the thumb up or thumb down as to whether or not the gladiator lives or dies. You know, like that's how comical, how frustratingly cartoonish this has become, to where in relatively open court, you have U.S. State Department officials dictating the course of the proceeding. Like, there's not even a semblance of, this is a UK court with a UK magistrate conducting the court. You're that feeling, that sense, that pretense is completely gone. And why we don't have more people in independent media willing to discuss this really fucking pisses me off. To find out that there are popular YouTubers or even people who purport to write for independent outlets that are basically running around telling anyone who's trying to make a case for Julian Assange, like, yo, lose my number, I can't talk about this. That kind of fear is literally killing Julian Assange, and it's preventing accurate information from accessing the ears of people who really need to hear it. Because by the time you get to this show in your journey, nobody lands on Slow News Day after seeing one bad episode of Rachel Maddow or one bad episode of Tucker Carlson or something like that. There's a lengthy process. And the guests here have probably gone through a little bit of graduation, I suppose, where maybe some of them started out with like TYT or Sam Cedar or something like that and moved on to Jimmy Dore, and have then wanted to expand their information base a little, because as rad and as funny and as informative as Jimmy Dore is, he's still using mainstream media for 90 to 99% of his baseline content. And the show is still a call and response to how bad and how bought corporate media is. And that's good. And that's necessary. But where do you go from there?
I agree with you. I think that, yes, I do. I think that independent media, being the fact that it is able to talk about Julian Assange, and when I say able to, I mean that there aren't, corporate sponsors and government interference that are preventing that. It's really just self-censorship that is preventing those independent media from talking about his case. I feel like there's an absolute obligation to do so, because these are the only platforms where people can have conversations about Julian Assange and about issues related to the free press. So yeah, it is extremely frustrating when it's largely ignored. And it's also, what's even more frustrating is when I see some people actually get facts blatantly wrong. And what it shows is that they're getting their information from mainstream media. And that's what I like about your show, Steve, and I mean this sincerely, is when you are talking about these issues, number one, you're not covering, what everybody else is covering. You're covering different subjects. Also, too, you're not getting your information from mainstream media sources or corporate media sources. You are getting it from independent outlets. Like, when we talk about these issues, we're referencing independent sites. We're not using mainstream media talking points or mainstream media websites, news organizations, what have you. I see that happening a lot, and you could tell when people do that because their facts are wrong oftentimes, and it's really easy to see through. So I think that's also just as shameful, if not even more shameful.
Well, thank you. And you're right. You are. It's self-censorship. It is not. It's not a victimless crime. And I don't. I that might sound a little bit weird. But I view censorship in general as a criminal act. I do. It's something that has been implemented throughout history to silence dissent. It's a soft form of the boot to the neck. And when people are motivated by money, when people are motivated by fear, they are going to engage in self-censorship with a regularity that puts them on par with mainstream media. And this isn't to say that I think that Jimmy Dore's show is mainstream media, or I don't know, I'm just going to throw names out here. I don't know whether or not they have anything to do with the exact thing that we're talking about. But like Tim Black's show, or even to an extent like Nico House, or Jamal, I'm trying to. I haven't been able to watch anybody in like months, dude. I haven't. Like, I've caught a couple of shows here and there, but between what we're doing on Action for Assange, my fucking brutal ass job, and this show, I don't get a lot of time to sit around and watch other content.
Right.
But I hear about it, and I hear about it from my audience because they kick ass and they let me know, who's slipping up and who's doing a good job. But to be bullied into covering Julian Assange, or to only do it when someone like Pam Anderson comes out on The View and has to defend herself in front of, a daughter of the empire and fucking multimillionaires Whoopi Goldberg and Joy, whatever her name is, and I don't know.
Yeah.
There's and there's another co-host, and I don't watch The View. I made this perfectly clear. Like, I haven't even, I've never been in a position where watching The View has been something that I felt that I needed to do, whether I wanted to be informed or whether I wanted a piece of ass. Like, it's never incorporated itself into my daily program. So I don't specifically know who everybody on the show is, but I know that the only time all of independent media can come together to speak up about Julian Assange is if something takes place on the goddamn View. And it's like, why would you subject your audience to that? Like,
yeah, you're right. It takes people to cover it once it becomes a sensational topic in the mainstream media. Like you gave the example of Pam Anderson being on The View. There has to be something quite dramatic to take place for a lot of people in independent media to cover it. Again, yeah, there are some people that do a great job that cover it regularly. One of those people is Gordon Dimmick. He's in the UK. He is hands down, the best for coverage on Julian Assange.
Gordon, I will leave my wife for you. I'll leave my wife for you, Gordon. You let me know, buddy. I did know. You're absolutely right. Gordon is the only independent media in the UK. Like, really and truly, there's a right-wing media in the UK that is quote-unquote independent. It's not part of... I read recently that like 95% of all UK media outlets are owned by just 3 companies.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
they've got it just as bad as we do. You would think that there would be an opportunity for, at least a handful of different people that aren't named Gordon Dimmick to do an independent news show. But it's just him. So him separating himself from from an entire country's worth of media personalities is phenomenal. And yeah, George Galloway is in the UK and he has a show. Mm-hmm. His show is internationally syndicated through Sputnik and by extension RT. He is an independent voice in mainstream media as far as I'm concerned. And I love George Galloway, and I'm not knocking George Galloway. I'm just trying to I'm trying to put this into the right focus. Like, I don't consider RT independent media.
Well, here's the thing with RT too is that yeah, they're not independent. They are funded by the Russian government. However, RT makes that very clear. They say on their website, on you could find it anywhere, that they are funded by the Russian government. And as far as I understand, the journalists who work there have complete editorial freedom, and they can even be critical of the Russian government, and they're not bound to certain talking points. I don't know if that's definitively true, but from what I understand, it is. Whereas, say, our mainstream media that is funded by corporations in the United States, like ABC, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, they put on the facade as if they are unbiased and that they're not clear about where they get their funding, whereas RT is very clear. So I think there's a little bit of a difference with that.
Well, and the reason we see that RT is funded by the Russian government everywhere on every video, it was a knee jerk reaction to Russiagate. You know,
Yeah.
like for Lee Camp for quite a while, and I know he may still, but he would start off every show, saying, welcome to Redacted Tonight, where Americans in America cover where American events are Russian agents. And that's just that's how the framing has been. I've noticed over the last year of doing the show that there will be people who refer to this show as a Russian outlet or a Putin friendly outlet or some shit like that. Like
Of course.
I'm a Russian bot here in Boulder Creek, California, because I'm not towing the fucking company line when it comes to propaganda.
Or the four of us are working for a PR firm.
Or we're working for a PR firm.
For a PR firm making millions of dollars. We'd have a lot better of setup if that were the case. All of us.
I would have more tattoos. I would be able to quit my day job. I would be able to broadcast multiple times a day, every day. I would not be fucking wearing the same jeans I wore to my volunteer event yesterday because I ran out of time doing other shit between getting home yesterday and now. I probably would be dressing like George Galloway more often. I gotta say, man, I understand why George is such a sharp dresser now, having transformed myself into him. It feels a little bit more authoritative when you're in a three-piece suit, or at least a three-piece suit from the waist up, because I was wearing fucking ripped jeans with jammies underneath them when we were doing the Halloween show. I wasn't about to put on suit pants off camera. That just doesn't make any sense. But I understand like why his presentation is so top shelf, and it does add kind of an air of professionalism that I doubt I will ever achieve. But I'm not going for their idea of professionalism. I'm going for getting as much truth out as I can before they round me up and fucking ship me off like they tried to do to Max Blumenthal.
Yeah, exactly. But hey, look, I think that's a major point to be made, though, is that often, too, I was talking to Ian Schlackman. I interviewed him about for another project I'm working on. I actually interviewed you for it, too, and some others, one of your viewers. But Ian Schlackman was saying one of the main problems with independent media, at least through his perspective, is that oftentimes they try to be like mainstream media or try to emulate that. So I think that you're just being yourself and being you is what we need in independent media. And ultimately, that's what people like about you. Everybody has their own a persona. And I think for George Galloway, for him, it just suits his entire
Well, he's a
his
former
entire
minister
brand,
of
I guess.
parliament. He's, you know, like
Exactly.
there's he is risen to levels of international renown, and as a character, he's one of the most fascinating people to watch. I thoroughly enjoy when he gets animated and his head jerks this way or that way because he's got, you know, to punctuate a word a specific way. Um, but I you're right, dude. If we had a PR firm, we would have, you know, a higher production value, probably a different concept of presentation. What that shit is federal agents
Yes.
trolling Twitter to sow discord amongst people in the Assange community or the whistleblower community, the truth community, you know, actual journalism. And we see it a lot, but it's hard to explain to someone who is still along their journey that yes, there are people who are paid by intelligence agencies specifically to, you know, jam a wrench into the works and fuck up everyone's program. And it's
Yeah, because it seems quite unbelievable. It seems like something that is almost made up because it seems so ridiculous, but it's absolutely true. There are people who are paid to be online trolls and to sell misinformation and put forth misinformation. However, at the same time, it is ridiculous stuff. How anybody could fall for this or believe some of these assertions is beyond me because it is so ridiculous. But again, that also ties into Susie Dawson's work, where she explains these methods. And yeah, she goes into depth about this and has written about it quite a bit. And I think they'll be talking more on that tonight with the One versus Five Eye live stream at 8 p.m. So
yeah,
yeah, if
thank
you're
you for
interested in that stuff, do tune in to her channel. It's Susie 3D. Very interesting stuff, but she explains all of this, and it's really important information to have, especially if you're an activist or you're very politically aware, and if you're very vocal on Twitter, to know that there are people being paid to do this and it'll also make you more protective of your identity and also careful about what you post because that's an important point as well because any little thing could be twisted and taken out of proportion.
I love the way that Susie approaches it because she doesn't leave any room for misinterpretation. These guys are the literal eye of Sauron. You can't misinterpret that, you know? It, her personal courage and personal determination over the last almost decade of what she has gone through and endured and what she is still going through and enduring should serve as an inspiration instead of a warning. You know, we're we're barreling into, I don't know if you believe the reporting, maybe 20 to 30 years of planet left unless green capitalism saves us. Um, we have an untenable economy. We have an untenable government. We have a fucking puppet tin pot government in general. We've got who are being led by the nose by an unelected permanent intelligence community state, national security state. And what Susie's doing with the One Verse Five Eye series and what you as the U.S. spokes lady are helping do is eliminate the obfuscation on that. And yeah, just I have a lot of respect for Susie Dawson. I would put her on the list of people that I would really like to one day interview. Um, Her and El Provocateur, Cory Morningstar, the author of the Manufacturing of Greta Thunberg for Consent series. There's what amazes me is that there are so many incredible women who are kicking ass in journalism and in dropping truth, and like I don't think that you as a collective sex get enough credit for doing the work that needs to be done. So I would like to take a moment to do that now, and thank you very much to Susie and Elizabeth, you, Christy. There's a lot. Caitlin Johnstone, Whitney Webb, Corey Morningside. Yeah, there's so many fantastic women who are kicking ass who don't receive enough credit for it. So
Well, thank you.
yeah, yeah,
Well, thank you. Yeah, and Christy and I have spoken about this before too. It's oftentimes, in neither she or I, we are not feminists, but oftentimes it is the women in these movements who do get attacked in a very specific way. But you just have to, persevere through it. But yeah, I mean, Susie Dawson is absolutely somebody to look to, not only as an incredible journalist, but also as somebody who is absolutely fearless and courageous, and also really cares about other people too, because she is holding these teach-ins so people have the knowledge about what is really happening with these intelligence agencies. She wants people to know what's happening, because it's only through our knowledge and understanding of what's taking place that we're able to really initiate any real change in this situation.
well, and that's the thing. Like people are hardwired to avoid conflict. People are hardwired to be polite, not rock the boat. And you're told as a kid, or at least I was told as a kid, not to make waves. And, that kind of had that children should be seen and not heard approach. And if you're beaten into thinking like that, whether physically or emotionally or psychologically, just, that's how you've been programmed. As an adult, when you hear someone who looks authoritative or sounds authoritative tell you some bullshit like Julian Assange is responsible for putting American soldiers in harm's way, you're going to believe that without a second thought. And I guess where this show comes in, where Susie comes in, where Consortium News and Mint Press News come in, is to be that second thought, to be the people who are going, yo, look, no, it's really honestly everything you've been taught is bullshit, and I don't care how fucking plastic pants crazy town that sounds. Sit down with me for a minute and we'll talk about it. And I don't know. It gets frustrating because all of the programming that we've endured throughout our lives, no matter how old we are, can come out at the most inopportune moments. Like when you have to defend Bernie Sanders against all reason. Or you have to defend Tulsi Gabbard against all reason. I've long said the pathway to neoliberalism begins with selecting a candidate in the Democratic primary and then spending the next however many days, weeks, months, or years defending shitty decision after shitty decision, shitty choice after shitty choice, shitty inaction or action after shitty inaction or action. And that's how you wind up becoming a fan of the fact that like George Bush danced with Ellen, or they share a football game together, or something like that. I want to kind of transition over into Bernard Jesus Sanders for a moment, because we had a little dust up on the show. There was some on the action for on the Free Assange vigil. There was some lingering, I guess, feelings. I don't know. A couple of people got the block on Twitter.
Yeah.
And
so I want to make a.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, I was just gonna say, yeah. I want to at least explain what was going through my head at the time and what our general goals are. And Steve, I think you'll agree here, is that, we are not going to censor anybody. We invite all viewpoints. Of course, that's within reason. And, I saw a debate that was going to happen. in those moments, I didn't expect it to get as heated, and I especially didn't expect it to linger over until the next day and the next few days, but it did. But at the same time, I'm still happy that that conversation took place in general. And, there maybe I could have shut it down a little bit earlier, but I just wanted them to be able to talk it out and to express their ideas. But what good came out of it was the fact that people were then on Twitter urging to call the Sanders campaign to release a statement about Julian Assange. So at least amping up some pressure on him. So I think that's one good thing that came from it. And also, too, we know that this conversation, besides this show and the Free Assange Vigil series, that type of debate and conversation isn't really going to happen anywhere else. So I
No.
just wanted to touch on the overall fact that even took place during the vigils. I think it's something that needed to happen.
When it comes down to honesty about Bernard Jesus Sanders, when it comes down to looking at the thing and describing the thing that's in front of you instead of the thing that could be or was or something like that. There's a mental block that goes off, not just in Bernie Sanders supporters, but in the people that cover the political horse race. Like, you can see how it pains Jimmy Dore to criticize Bernie Sanders because it means money. It means clicks. It means ad revenue. Even Nico House, in his full-throated surrogacy for Tulsi Gabbard, will always say nice things about Bernie Sanders. Always. And you can't take his inaction or his inability to say a sentence as a secret coded message that he totally believes exactly the thing that you believe. He just can't say it. Like, it fucking I'll let you answer that while I try to pull up this article on the J Street conference.
Yeah, sure. So basically what's happening there, what you're describing, is people are basically taking a candidate's statements in their stance, and they're trying to, or I guess, their own stance. A person is trying to take their own stance, and they're trying to figure out ways to mentally convince themselves that their candidate that they praise and worship aligns with their same ideology. I hope that makes sense. But this is, again, going back to the point of really seeing these candidates as like rock stars and as celebrities. They are not. They work for us, and the only way that we are going to get them to really improve ideologically and to maybe change their stance on some issues that we don't like is by their base of supporters putting pressure on them to do so. And just sitting idly by, making excuses and saying, well, no, they really do agree with me, they just can't say it yet, and doing like a mental gymnastics, as Jimmy Dore would say, doesn't make any sense. And we're not going to get a better America or a better candidate by having that mentality.
I have these conversations with my good friend Jason Carney, and with my buddy George down in LA frequently, and those two guys are 100% willing to recognize that the process itself is a rigged process. That that even if against all odds Bernie Sanders makes it through a rigged primary contested convention unscathed, that that alone will be enough, and he'll be able to govern and deliver on the things that he's been promising. And that kind of disconnect with reality, I suppose, is what allows people to put one foot in front of the other every day. But you can walk in reality too. You can. It's possible to be honest and critical of Bernie Sanders and question whether or not saying I won't prosecute whistleblowers under the Espionage Act, as he recently said, questioning whether or not that also applies to journalists. Because Julian Assange, not a whistleblower.
Not a whistleblower, right?
Julian
Exactly.
Assange.
We have to.
I think you said that on Charles's show the other day too. You were trying to make that point. Julian Assange is a publisher and a journalist. He's not a whistleblower. If you're
I did say that he's not a whistleblower.
And if you're only going to protect quote unquote whistleblowers, why the fuck can't you say any of their names out loud? Why can't you say, yes, I would automatically on day one extend a pardon to John Kiriakou. I would absolutely commute or pardon Chelsea Manning, Jeremy Hammond, any kind of holdover, probation, or whatever that someone like Barrett Bennett might have. Dale, or, like, there's the inability to follow through is what bugs the shit out of me, because there is, at that point, no distinction between Bernard Jesus Sanders and any other run-of-the-mill politician.
No, there isn't, but I agree with you on that. However, those who are more willing to forgive Sanders and excuse his inability to say Julian Assange's name, they do see him as being different and being held to a different standard, because they feel sorry for him, because he's a sympathetic character, because he was cheated in 2016. So that's the fundamental difference here, is that they see him as having an excuse and a reason to maybe not toe the line or challenge authority. And also too, because we were going to talk about the speech he just gave. And I noticed oftentimes he was having to say, I know many people feel that my policies and my political ideology is radical. He kept trying to make excuses or justify that his ideas aren't radical. And they aren't. They aren't at all. But it's like, let's get past this. Like, just you don't even have to go there. It just shows that he's really on the defense this time around, and maybe not on the defense, but definitely trying not to challenge the establishment.
Well, and look, you can't you can't build a campaign on this is a political revolution. We are fundamentally going to change everything about the country by modeling it almost precisely off of what another country has been doing for 45 years. That's not radical change by any means. That's not any sort of revolution. Revolutions don't take place at the goddamn ballot box. Certainly not in a country where the process is rigged, and it's rigged because there are court documents that show it. Real quick, I want to mention that next week at this time, I will be moderating a debate between Nico House and a gentleman named, I don't know Obi's last name, but on Twitter he's Yellow Vest America, and they've been sniping at each other and going at each other over Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard and any and every policy under the sun for months, and it finally came down to, okay, well, let's have a conversation about it. Okay, we need a neutral moderator. My dumbass hand went up. And I was like, I'm neutral. I think the whole process is rigged.
Yeah. Like, I like it from that angle. But I think you're a good choice for that. So, yeah, everybody check that out. I'll be watching for sure.
But how I want to go into this J Street clip, because I do have that. I have the Al Jazeera clip for it ready to play. Okay. It's one thing to be emotionally invested in an outcome, right? Or
Yes.
emotionally
Yes.
invested in people, and place, transfer your emotions onto that person or onto the possibility of that outcome. But you have to have some grain of reality that keeps you, if not rooted, then active, to ensure the success of that outcome. You can't just sit back at home and be like, yeah, Medicare for all, yeah, Bernie, yeah, political process, and expect all that to happen without your participation.
Yeah, no,
Like
you
if
can't.
it, go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree with what you were saying, that this is an emotional investment into the person, and an emotional investment into the candidate. And it's all stemming from Sanders being um, screwed over, for lack of a better term, in 2016. That's why I was saying he's a very sympathetic character. People feel sorry for him. But again, I would urge everybody to kind of take a step back and more so cling to the ideologies and your political stances than the person, than the candidate, because they're going to let you down. At the end of the day, they're all still politicians.
And I'm glad you mentioned a couple of times now the way that Bernie was screwed over in 2016, because that there is the cornerstone of the rift between people who looked at Bernie as their compromise candidate in 2016, and
Mm-hmm.
how watching him handle it becoming public knowledge that the process was rigged, it becoming public knowledge that he specifically was targeted, um, it becoming public knowledge all of the media manipulation that surrounded the 2016 election, and people either went, well, we got to make sure he gets elected in 4 years, or they went, I can't believe this fucking coward just folded like wet cardboard and fucking, spread cheeks for the establishment like that. And I can't trust this individual because of that reaction. Like, for some people, him getting screwed over, as you said, it made him a sympathetic figure, but it made people trust him all the more.
Yeah.
Whereas, and that's one of the that's always one of the reasons that I enjoy talking to Elizabeth Boss about stuff like this, is because she has no qualms saying, look, man, this guy handled this situation all wrong. And that's where the conflict begins, because so many people are willing to extend leniency to Bernie Sanders because he's a sympathetic figure. And then that's what allows the transference of emotion and the projection of emotion onto him, that he will always do the right thing. And I don't know if there's evidence to support that. I'm gonna pull up the clip here.
Okay.
This is Bernie Sanders from the J Street Conference on Palestine, and I wonder if I have volume on this.
Last week, you joined every single U.S. senator in signing a letter to the UN Secretary General saying that the institution is biased against Israel and effectively trying to shield it from criticism.
No. I don't accept that. Look, I didn't write that letter. I signed on to the letter. It's not a letter that I would have written. There are many problems with Israel, and I have been critical and will be critical of a lot of what Israel does. On the other hand, to see Israel attacked over and over again for human rights violations, which may be true, when you have countries like Saudi Arabia or Syria. Saudi Arabia, I'm not quite sure if women can even drive a car today, okay? So I think the thrust of that letter is not to say that Israel does not have human rights issues. It does. But to say, how come it's only Israel when you have other countries where women are treated as third-class citizens, where in Egypt, I don't know how many thousands of people now lingering in jail. So that's the point of that. Not to defend Israel, but to say why only Israel. You want to talk about human rights? Let's talk about human rights.
Should the UN shield Israel from
No,
criticism?
of course not.
Okay. This letter also denounces the boycott, divestment, sanctions.
I'm gonna pause that here for a second so we can kind of talk through that.
Okay.
Do you are you familiar with the letter that they're talking about, or any of that? Or are you familiar with because what they were basically scolding anyone who specifically calls out Israel, anyone who doesn't automatically lump in every other country in the Middle East that has a shitty policy. And it's one of those things where, look, if you can't point across the street at your neighbor's lawn and say they're not taking care of their house when you yourself are a 35 cat having hoarder. You know, Israel is our house. It is. You can go from 1948 on to now and very rarely find a politician or anyone involved in government at all that will express an opinion on Israel that is anything other than they have a divine right to exist, and the U.S. is their strongest ally, and we will do whatever we can, and blah, blah, blah. Like, when Bernie gets moderately critical of Israel, or does the approved talking point by the DNC that Benjamin Netanyahu is a racist, that is a safe statement. And when I go back to the Mint Press article that I had for that clip, we can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I noticed too, because I did watch that speech, like I said, and I noticed too that he'll say something that's a little bit challenging of the accepted narrative when it comes to Israel and Palestine, and then he'll throw in a little statement in there as well that's sort of pro-Israel. I notice it's almost strategic in a way. That's not the part that you were just showing, but I noticed that in the speech.
Yeah, well, and we're coming up to, he's about to talk about BDS here, and I think this is vitally important too, so I'm going to let this play.
Known as BDS. You, in your lifetime, are a longtime proponent of nonviolent protests.
Yep.
This, in the eyes of many Palestinians, is the effective way to get Israel to comply with international law and respect Palestinian human rights. Do you accept that?
No, I don't. I mean, look, I respect people will do what they want to do, but I think our job as a nation is to do everything humanly possible to bring Israel and the Palestinians and the entire Middle East to the degree that we can together. But no, I'm not a supporter of that.
Palestinians will say they've resisted violently.
Okay. What's your opinion on the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement? Do you think that is a viable avenue for Palestinian people to put, or Palestinian community to put pressure on Israel?
I think that's tough. I definitely think, though, that the United States needs to, and I guess I'm not so much answering your question, but I think that the U.S. needs to withdraw itself from this issue and absolutely cut off the funding that's going to Israel. This has been going on for too long, and I also thinking that we are able to solve this problem there is really out of touch. I don't see that being possible. I think that there's some things that maybe we could do a little bit differently, and that's what I was alluding to earlier with, cutting off some of this funding and this really ingrained allegiance with Israel that extends even beyond the conflict with the Palestinians, and also with our intelligence agencies. I mean, it's a deeply ingrained relationship that I think is been detrimental. And of course, we know the Israeli government is a racist government. It's been, implementing apartheid, and it's something that we are supporting and funding, and that needs to stop. However, we know that much of the information that's being provided to the American people through the corporate media is all about how the Palestinians are wrong, how they're bad, and how Israel needs our help, our funding, and that Netanyahu is a person to be revered.
Well, yeah, except for now that Netanyahu has sort of fallen out of favor by embracing Donald Trump. Again, Democrats are allowed to call him a racist. Democrats are allowed to go after Bibi now, and it started with Beto O'Rourke, like at the beginning of this year, calling Netanyahu a racist as a presidential candidate. Beto, of course, Bobby Franny, is now no longer running for president. He is moved on to a different skate park, as it were, and will, I don't know, be falling up into some other position of authority. I'm sure. But once old Bobby Franny was able to call Netanyahu a racist, then it was, and I said this on an episode of Slow News Day at the time, like that's the signal from the Democratic Party as to who they're backing in Israel's next election. It's not Netanyahu. It's in fact a different war criminal who is currently being sued for war crimes. But I want to go back to this article real quick because it discusses some of the things that you're talking about. And it also sort of falls in line with a lot of the things that I've said on this show. So I always like it when I can be, right about something. But where'd it go? Okay, there we go. So the author of this Mint Press piece is Miko Peled. His father was Mati Peled, who was a celebrated IDF general, fought in the war in 1967, and then went on to be more of a proponent of a peace and resolution with Palestine. So to pick it up kind of in there regarding Mati Peled, 2 decades later, when it was clear that Israel would never allow this to happen, a two-state solution is what would never be allowed to happen. My father, Mati Peled, called for the U.S. to halt its financial and military aid to Israel. By 1992, he called for sanctions against Israel. So when Bernie Sanders and other so-called progressives like J Street talk about a two-state solution and the possibility of using aid to pressure Israel, they are decades late and billions of dollars short. Without full support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, no progress can be achieved for Palestinian rights. And that is what Bernard Jesus Sanders just told the Al Jazeera reporter that he did not support.
Yeah, we've been so wrong for too long on this issue, and have just caused even more harm in this region of the world. So I think that the passage that you just read there is important, because it does show that this is, of course, going to take some time, as far as there's going to need to be some steps and implementation step by step, I guess, which is normally not really something that I would advocate for, small change, but I guess that it's a great place to start. Unfortunately, I feel like our ties to Israel are so strong. They still are. Of course, like you were saying earlier, we have kind of slightly moved away from that, or at least challenging that.
Oh no, we're only challenging Netanyahu. Just the personage of Benjamin Netanyahu. his opponent that the Democrats are backing is actually more of a hard right anti-Palestinian figure. It's just optically, it's easy to pick on Netanyahu because he's such a monstrous individual, and because him and Trump are buds. You know,
Exactly. There's pictures of them together. Netanyahu's been a friend of the right wing in this country for some time. So that's what makes this issue even more of a politically partisan issue in the United States, is because of that. Or that's partially why.
I'm gonna go finish out the burning clip here.
They get punished. They resist non-violently with BDS. They're also punished. We're entering the 50th year in the occupation. June marks 50 years of occupation starting 1967. We know the occupation has no end in sight. We know that this is a government that doesn't plan on ending it. And talks have failed for a quarter century. What, if not BDS, is left for the Palestinians to do?
What must be done is that the United States of America must have a Middle East policy which is even-handed, which does not simply supply endless amounts of money, military support to Israel, but which treats both sides with respect and dignity and does our best to bring them to the table. Okay?
Just one more question. It's increasingly evident that hopes for a two-state solution are almost dead. At the same time, polls among Palestinians...
I'm going to go ahead and stop that right there, because those are political weasel words. As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I had a hard time hearing that.
Okay.
Can you just recap what he had said? It just is a little bit staticky.
Yeah, and I apologize for that.
Some.
I don't understand
okay.
where the static's coming from. But what he said, because she asked him flat out, if you don't oppose, or if you oppose BDS, if you don't think that boycott, divesting, and sanctions is, if not the right way, the good, a good avenue for them to successfully put pressure on Israel to follow international law. That's all they're trying to get them to do at this point through BDS, is do what the law tells them they're supposed to do, not get any of their territory back, not overthrow the government, not eliminate the legalized apartheid state that Israel is, but just to get them to follow the fucking law. If you, Bernie Jesus Sanders, don't think that that is the right course of action, what is? And he goes, well, the United States needs to have an even-handed Middle East policy.
Okay.
That was his answer. And that's political weasel words.
Sure.
It's and as the Mint Press article points out, it's decades late and billions of dollars short to try to put financial pressure on Israel when we have given so many billions over the years. If you're a presidential candidate and you are the change agent, you are you're telling people that you're going to run as the organizer in chief, and you can't bring yourself to say, yes, divesting from Israeli banks is a good idea to put pressure on them, or introducing sanctions, which, again, was suggested in 1992 by a former IDF general. What are you going to do when you get actual pressure from the people in your party to give Israel everything they want? If you can't take a stance on something like as simple as, pull your money out of that bank.
Exactly, because that is a measure that's not even that drastic. As you were pointing out and outlining earlier, it's not all it's asking or requiring the Israeli government to do, as far as I understand, is to just follow international law. That's it. It's not really asking for a whole lot or pressuring them to do much more than that. So it's not even something that's a super um, or should be at least super controversial. It should not be, but unfortunately it is, because of our ties to Israel are so strong. But again, going back to your point about, if he is not going to talk about this now, how can we expect him to actually, implement common sense strategy in that area and implement BDS? We can't. But that's because that doesn't make any sense to think that, oh, well, he can't talk about it right now, but once he's elected, he'll go ahead and do it. That doesn't make any sense. So I see, I'm sure if we were to have conversations with people who are very avid supporters of Bernie Sanders, then I think they would probably maybe go back to the same argument that we see with Julian Assange, that, oh, we can't talk about it right now, but once he gets in office, he'll do something.
And that's the other side of that coin that nobody really wants to discuss. The premise then becomes Bernie Sanders governs by executive order and executive order alone.
Yeah.
And you can make that case, but you have to accept reality that any executive order can be undone, that all that guarantees is righteous retribution in the midterm elections. All that does is activate a far right base that is ever increasingly including run-of-the-mill Democrats into fighting back against what will inarguably be spun as a president playing dictator and ruling by executive order.
Yeah, I didn't even think of it that way, but now that you mention it, with a president ruling by executive order, that's very likely, that's a really good point to make in all of this. But I think, too, this is just another example of his being really soft on some issues and succumbing to establishment pressures, I think, and just being really hesitant to say things and to promise bold action, which is what we need at this time. And it doesn't really come as, a surprise at this point. It is seeing his other stances on other issues, and I mean Julian Assange, namely. But
and by issues, I mean Julian Assange. But you're right. You are it. Okay. He's had, there should be, and I think Dak might have said this on the sorry Dak, if you're oh shit, I just fucking lost it.
Dak said something about
I know.
Well, he said a lot about Sanders.
Oh, it'll pop back into my head. It's just it's frustrating for me to I don't know, not get, I don't want to say insulting, but not get a little like kind of mean about it when Julian Assange himself doesn't have time. And I know that we tried to make this point on the vigil, but none of us get to do what we do if the U.S. government is allowed to execute Julian Assange for the crime of telling the truth about them. You take the elimination of press freedom combined with what they've done to gut net neutrality and what they're doing in terms of social media censorship and the ability to disseminate information that runs counter to the narrative, it becomes even harder than it is right now. And this shit is not easy. It's not only like telling the truth is easy, but doing it in a way that reaches people is absolutely difficult. It is. You know, I mean, this show's been on for about a year, and I watch it where, you know, 30, 40, 50 people will subscribe to the show one day, and it will count 3. The same thing happens on Twitter in terms of followers for me. Like, I've been at right around the exact same amount of followers for well over a month. And, you know, for every 20 or 30 that follow the show, like 17 are unfollowed. Not that people are walking away, but that they're just taken away.
Exactly. And and we know this already, but, you know, YouTube manipulates their number of views. Like, there's been videos that I've done that on other shows where they have gotten like X amount of views, and then an hour later I just like look at it and there's actually like less views, which of course doesn't make any sense, but that's what happens. And they unsubscribe people, they demonetize videos, and they do it, or they'll put it in for reviews. So the amount of time, that first like 24 hours or 48 hours that you're going to be making the most money from ads, they put it under a review, so you can't generate any money from that. So it just it's a mechanism to de-incentivize people from talking about certain things that Google doesn't like. And unfortunately, that goes back to the point we were making, where people aren't talking about Julian Assange enough in independent media. And oftentimes, and that's not everybody, but oftentimes if they are talking about it, like I said, they get their information from mainstream sources.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of independent media personalities that know better or should know better, that have used the words rape charges when discussing Julian Assange. And
call them out, guys, by the way. If you see that, call them out on it, because I've seen it from people that should absolutely know better, that have thousands of subscribers, and people that have they have a really big voice, and they're still talking, they're still saying there are rape charges. So if you see this misinformation out there, call them out on that, because ultimately they are the people who are holding them to a high standard is you, the viewers.
Yeah, and I want, you know, I mean, I've encouraged the audience here to get at me. There was a commenter in a thread. I had done a thing about chemtrails and coal fly ash, and I got called out for it not having a background in reading scientific reports, because it apparently wasn't written as a scientific report. And I'm going to look into that more and more and more. Like, I am. That's not going away. But I depend on my audience to keep me honest, to teach me new things. Like, I'm one dude who doesn't have a whole lot of free time. And I need my audience to help me stay accountable. And it seems like there's a lot of people who are, I'm not going to say going through the motions, because I know how much work goes into producing a show, but taking great advantage of their subscriber count, or the relationship that they forged with their audience in the earlier days, when they probably had to be more honest with them, you know. And now, however many years later, there's sort of a taking advantage of those numbers, of the fact that your audience is there because they like you and like what you have to say. It allows, I think, for not only more self-censorship, but for the ability to gaslight, as far as something like, I mean, whether or not it's intentional. You know, you just saying the words rape charges in connection to Julian Assange is absolutely gaslighting. It's absolutely bullshit. It's 100% lies. But if your audience isn't as engaged as you are in terms of finding your news, you'll never be called out for that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Somebody in the chat just said, name a few names, Taylor. I'd be glad to call them out. I'm not going to do that. And yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. But again, just if you see misinformation, just call them out in the chat, or ask them to maybe cover Julian Assange more, or Max Blumenthal more. Who has covered that? Jimmy Dore? That's it?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are people that have talked about it, like Nico did a show about it, Jamarl did a show about it, Tim Black did a segment about
Okay.
it. But rarely it like that happens because it's I think kind of a flavor of the day sort of thing. I don't know
Yeah.
if there have been any follow-ups on that. And I wish that I had a little bit more confidence in myself to directly ask Max Blumenthal to come on the show, but I don't. At the same time, I don't know why he would. You know, other than like my audience already knows about him. I think that it's people who may not otherwise have access to that information are the ones that should be hearing about Max Blumenthal. As much as a fucking travesty and miscarriage of I guess justice, even though it sounds fucking trite as shit, it is for Max to be arrested 5 months after the fact over this thing.
Yeah.
That is fabricated in and of itself. If Max Blumenthal was kicking the shit out of a woman, don't you think there'd be video of that? Like, I personally know how many cameras were in front of the Venezuelan embassy because I was fucking interviewing a guy there. You know? Everybody on fake President Guaido's side was filming. Everyone had a camera out. Most of the embassy protectors had cameras out. Whether or not you could transmit video was the problem because signal was being scrambled like a motherfucker while that was going on. When I was talking to Al, I had to wait until he left Embassy Row and went like down a block and a half to a coffee shop before he had signal again. But there would be video of Max Blumenthal
Right.
kicking a woman. You know, like
Is that the exact nature of this charge?
he was arrested for assault, and the claim is that yeah, he physically beat a woman.
See, this is all to make him also, it's not only to punish him for his journalism and to send a greater message, but it's also to make him look bad as a person. It's also to make him look like he's a really bad guy, always going to hurt a woman. It's similar to what happened with Assange and the two Swedish women. Oh, make him look like he has no respect for women. So therefore, you have half of the population that despises you, and you have everything else that comes along with that. So I think that it's just so typical and predictable to see this happen. That's what I think. And yeah, it's so suspicious that they waited 5 months. He said that he would have, of course, talked to authorities if he knew that this arrest warrant was out. But he didn't even know that it was out. And so he waited, or he didn't wait, but they waited. And he was absolutely, I think, blindsided when they kind of just entered his home quite,
the way that Max describes it is that they were ready for a SWAT-style raid when they went to his place to haul him out there. Like, they rolled deep and they rolled armed. And that is nothing but a symbolic gesture. That is a show of force to explain what happens when you deliver information outside of the narrative. And it's important to highlight that Max was one of the very, very few people who took the time and the effort to cover the siege of the Venezuelan embassy. And along with Max, Alex Rubinstein, who was embedded in the embassy and who writes for Mint Press, his brother Ben was arrested in this. It wasn't just Max that got scooped up. There were 3 or 4 people that were arrested, 5 months after the fact on these charges.
Right. And of course, nobody, and we talked about this on the vigil, but of course nobody is talking about this, and that's partially because these are American journalists and activists on American soil. That's a big part of this, and we want to pretend that we have a free press in this country when that's obviously not the case. But they had a right. I mean, there were activists who were inside that Venezuelan embassy, and they had every right to be there. They had permission from the Maduro government to be there.
Yeah,
and they were just trying to
they were specifically reached out to and invited by the Maduro government to come and be there because their own embassy personnel had to flee for their lives. Like the fake ambassador Carlos Vecchio, who was a lawyer for Exxon.
Yeah.
Prior to his newfound position of fake ambassador, wasn't even allowed to issue passports. For fuck's sake, the people who were at his behest, have ties to not just U.S. oil concerns and interests, but have been trained by the U.S. military, are part of the ruling elite of Venezuela that was ousted when Hugo Chavez came into power. They're the sons of, Venezuela's ruling class who were raised outside of Venezuela, taught to hate the browner skinned and blacker Venezuelans. They're almost to the person, a pure white passing, U.S. or European educated, and children of privilege who were shining lasers in the eyes of embassy protectors. That's why you saw Medea Benjamin and other people in Code Pink walking around with the big sunglasses on their face during the siege of the embassy. I call them horse blinders because that's what they look like, but they're really dark, really large glasses that wrap around the side of your head because they were getting pen lasers shining in their lights. They were getting strobe lights shining at them. They had to try to find a way to non-violently break through a line of Vecchio's goons, who also had the tacit approval, if not full and cooperative approval, of the Secret Service and DC Metro Police. They had to non-violently break through a line of them with bags of groceries in order to get food up. Because no one who had been in the embassy for weeks on end could just run out and take a trip to the grocery store. It was a literal fucking siege. And Max Blumenthal was definitely part of the parties that were trying to deliver food. So was Al Suarez, the guy who I had on this show multiple times during the course of the siege. And power was shut, water was shut, like everything they could possibly do. They would try to break down the door day after day, night after night, while the police are standing there purposely looking the other way. And no, not true, one person out of all of the people that were there under orders of fake Ambassador Vecchio was arrested. They were allowed to beat, assault, intimidate, harass, again, shine laser beams in the eyeballs of embassy protectors. The one lady who got arrested for openly selling meth to Vecchio's people, broad daylight.
Really?
But they were hopped up on fucking coke and meth. They never went to sleep and they never left. And no one ever saw them eat, you know. But they've got unlimited energy to disrupt food delivery, to stomp a fucking 70-plus-year-old man who started Veterans for Peace. That was allowed to happen and no one got arrested. But 5 months later, you're going to arrest Max Blumenthal on a trumped-up charge because he was one of the very few people there who were telling people accurately what was going on.
Right, exactly. It's an understatement to say that here is another example of there being a double standard, of course. But I mean, this all goes back to the fact that Blumenthal, through Gray Zone, was just publishing truthful information that was very inconvenient for the U.S. government. And of course, they don't want people to be exposed to that information. And they want to de-incentivize people from publishing this information. And unfortunately, we also learned too that Press Freedom Tracker, an organization that is supposed to support journalists and free speech and free press, is failing to actually support Max Blumenthal because he was not in the course of reporting at the time of this arrest or at the time of this alleged assault. So he's not even getting support. These press freedom groups are just, they're awful.
Well, they're bought.
I guess I can't say, they are, yeah, exactly. They are, but they don't, it's just to appear as if that there is some sort of advocacy for free speech and free press in this country. They're all bought. Like
they got snarky with Max Blumenthal on Twitter. Like, snarky with the guy. And he's, you know, hey, this is a retaliatory act by a fucking fascist fucking government against me for telling the truth. And they're like, yeah, well, you know, I mean, really, if you can fuck right off there, buddy. You know, like that's how they treated the whole thing. I would like to, and maybe we should do this for a free Assange vigil, but try and figure out how the Press Freedom Tracker is funded and
that's a great idea.
Who's funding it? Because I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of the same names funding that outlet in like the Council on Foreign Relations or the Atlantic Council or any of these other groups that have stepped forward to tell us what is and isn't speech online.
Yeah, I think that'll be very telling of its motivations as an organization. And I'm sure that there is some overlap there, as you were just suggesting. But again, it's such a cliche thing to say, but of course, look at where they're getting their money from, and that will tell you much information about the organization and their motives. But I think we should also, too, look at their standards. Do they have any standards for what it means to be in the course of reporting? I mean, how do you even definitively prove that somebody was reporting at that time? It's as if they're trying to come up with ways to not support Max Blumenthal. That's what it seems like, because it's so abundantly clear to me, to you, to many other people that this is, of course, because of his reporting. And there's so much evidence to suggest that because of the timing, because they waited 5 months, and then also because these other people were very violent, the right-wing protesters or activists that were there, yet there's no consequences that they are, you know, being faced with. So,
and Max has justifiably and correctly been tying his arrest to what is happening with Julian Assange, and
there's a lot of overlap.
That point needs to be driven home by everyone deigning to cover it. You know, Julian Assange is a living, breathing human being who is being slowly murdered by a couple of different governments, or at orders of a couple of different governments, specifically because he printed information that they did not want printed. Max Blumenthal is arrested for not doing the printing of, but doing the physical reporting on things that the U.S. government doesn't want printed. I would not be surprised to find out as we go into this 2020 election that more reporters are getting rounded up. Publishing outlets are shutting down. Like, I saw where Consortium News has their is fundraising right now, so I threw them $10 that I didn't have. You know, I can't stress this enough to the people who are listening. If there are independent news outlets, not YouTubers or podcasters or whatever, but the people who are doing the actual physical reporting, if you support and are willing to give, you know, Slow News Day a couple of bucks a month, or Jimmy Dore a couple of bucks a month, or whatever, treat your independent news outlets the exact same way, because I base most of my content from outlets like Mint Press or Consortium or Zero Hedge or, you know, Truth Out and whatever and so instead of I used to be a patron of a handful of different YouTubers, and I am not, because that money is going to actual news outlets now. And I find that as the baseline material for 95% of independent media's content being mainstream news, I find that as that doesn't change, I'm less and less inclined to support quote unquote independent outlets like that. Because if your whole show is reacting to something that happens on mainstream media and how that relates to your personal coverage of the political horse race, I don't feel like you're not helping me, so why should I pay you for that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, so I think that I'm trying to not say too much.
You can say well, maybe you can't, because you're in a little bit of a different position than I am. I'm not. Yeah. I'm not one of Susie's spokespeople. I'm not. You know. I'm just here, and I'm not even sure exactly who you're thinking of or going to, you know, trying to avoid talking about. So I'm not going to.
Nobody in particular. Just no, I'm not trying to avoid anything, but I don't know. That made sense, right? But I think that you have a good point of saying that you want to fund the actual. I never really thought of it that way, but you have a good point, is that oftentimes YouTube is more so of a reaction to news that's being presented, whereas these independent outlets like Mint Press, Consortium, are people who are in Telesur and and others are actually on the ground doing the reporting that provides the information to people on YouTube to kind of build off of and provide further commentary on. So I see what you're saying.
And look, I mean, I understand that what this show does is a, you know, to a degree, a variation on that, where I'm not I don't think I'm reacting to what the article
think
says.
you
I'm just
are.
trying to go through it and understand it in real time with my friends, you know? is basically what
Yeah.
that is. But at the same time, there are always calls to action, and that's what we do at Free Assange too, is incorporate calls to action along with the issues that we're discussing. And fuck, dude, I've been telling people since day one, like, heads on pikes and general strikes or nothing fucking changes. Like, it's, you know, if you don't have an organized, activated fucking community, you need to figure out what you can do to get one. And I don't.
You're also providing original ideas though, too, not just like
Thank you.
recycling information. And you actually know what's like going on too, like in up to date.
To a degree, yeah, yeah.
So I think there's a difference than just complete reaction, which you were referring to earlier, where, you know, people are showing clips and then just reacting to them and, you know, trying to see the value in that. And I think there is value in that. But
Of course
I think
there
that
is.
the greatest threat at this point is the independent journalists on the ground. They are in the greatest amount of danger and I think in need of the most amount of support. Because of course we're seeing them be attacked. Those are the people that really do need support, and yeah.
And if it comes down to, you know, trumped up charges against YouTube commenters or whatnot, like, I'm probably not getting hauled off first anyway, based solely on the amount of suppression and lack of subscriber count that the show has. And I'm very close to 1,000 subscribers on paper when I've eclipsed that number time and time again in reality. But I do think it'll be fun to have a subscriber count to where I can watch all of my videos be demonetized in real time. You know,
Yeah.
I specifically, you know, opted out of monetization for the show on YouTube when I launched it, not realizing that you needed to have a certain amount of followers before you could monetize your videos. But I think when I hit that point, I'm going to go ahead and opt for monetization just so I can watch them all get demonetized. Like, no matter what I'm talking about. I'm not sure if I'm going to follow through with that or not, though. I don't know how much time you have. I know it's approaching noon. And that's when a band comes into the studio and starts getting awful noisy. But if you wanted to hang out for the next like 15 or so minutes, you're more than welcome to. I'm not sure what you have going on.
Yeah, I can. It's up to you though.
Okay. I think we should, we never actually got to it, but there is some crazy shit going on in Chile that I would like to kind of work through here. And when I said that, that format to a show doesn't help me, like, I meant that relating personally to me. Like, I find that I don't learn much when the show is just, you know, here's a clip from Chris Cillizza, or here's, you know, a politician giving a political speech while they're trying to run for office. Like, I'm not getting new information that way. As opposed to like when I watch Jason Bermas's show, that dude's there to teach. Or when I watch Susie, she's there to teach. Like, there's incredibly necessary and vital information that passes through their lips that more people should be absorbing, because it's literally press freedom. It's literally civil liberties. It's 100%, you know, gaining or finding some personal agency over yourself and the immediate area that you live in. And yeah, so that's where, that's where, at least me personally, that's where my money would go, is to that,
Yeah.
although I do love me some Ron Placone, and I throw him some bucks whenever I can. So here I've got the article pulled up, and this again is out of Mint Press. I'm gonna go ahead and read a little bit here. Santiago, Chile, we are at war with a powerful, relentless enemy that respects nothing nor anyone, thundered Chilean President Sebastián Piñera during a speech to the nation, deliberately echoing the infamous catchphrase of military dictator Augusto Pinochet. The enemy he was referencing were Chilean citizens, more than 1 million of them taking to the streets Friday afternoon in a revolt against the neoliberal system Piñera was implementing against their will, demanding his resignation. The spark for the revolt that started October 14th was a 30 peso increase to the subway fare in Santiago, the country's capital and by far its largest and most important city. But demonstrations quickly escalated into a general protest against the decades of neoliberal economic policies carried out by successive governments, leading to greater social and economic inequality. As a popular slogan of the process goes, it's not about 30 pesos, it's about 30 years. The government's response has been brutal. The president has declared a state of emergency across much of the country and ordered tanks through Santiago to break the movement, in images that would be on endless repeat in our media if Piñera were not such a loyal ally of Washington. The death toll currently stands at 18, with security forces arresting over 5,400 people in the first 4 days alone, well over double the number arrested in Hong Kong after 6 months of unrest. There's one reason why many in Chile see the threat to their country coming not from the people in the streets, but from the Piñera administration itself. Worldwide, we're seeing a reaction to neoliberalism as an ideology and as a style of government. Worldwide, we are seeing austerity being rejected. We're seeing neocolonialism and all of the nightmares that follow that being rejected. And here in the United States, we have parades with corporate sponsors and matching hats and fucking pre-crime.
Right. As you were reading through this, I was thinking of that, how we are seeing worldwide protests, and they're all really protesting against the same thing, which is the longstanding implementation of these neoliberal policies that have really harmed countries. And it for the majority of the time, it could all be traced back to the U.S., to ties with Washington, etc. So in a way, it is really cool to see people rise up like this. However, I know that, for the people in these countries, it's like devastating for this to be taking place. And what really struck me about this article too was that they're like using the military against their own people. We saw this happen in Ecuador. It reminded me a lot of Ecuador. And when we had Jose on, and he was talking to us about what was taking place, this sounds very familiar to me. I think it's interesting that we're seeing countries that have somewhat different governments that are not connected, or at least not near each other geographically, still rising up in opposition against the same thing. Everybody's essentially advocating for the same thing, which is to get rid of these neoliberal policies.
And look, when you talk about that with regular everyday people, if they're aware that half of the world is protesting, they're not drawing the connection that it's because of the failure of the exact same style of governance that we have lived under in this country for decades now. And that the states and nations that are protesting are 100% client states of the U.S. In most of the cases. France, where they've been going for a fucking year now, flat out states that they are protesting neoliberal incompetence in coordination with fascist practices. And that's, they're talking about fascism in the classical Italian sense, where it's a merger of corporation and state. You know, and I think that people, because the word is so misused and so often used, and everything's fascist, everyone's a fascist, or my favorite is when right wingers use the phrase fascist communist or fascist Marxist.
I know,
like that shit
makes no sense.
Cracks me up, dude.
Yeah.
But because the word has been so muddied, people forget that simply at its onset was just a merger of corporation and state. And even Bernie Sanders, like, doesn't mention that when he goes after corporations or when he goes after money in politics. You don't hear anything about, I'm going to stop no-bid contracts. I'm going to stop, former Congress people or former intelligence officers from becoming board members on multiple, intelligence capability software companies, or, in Dick Cheney's case, fucking Halliburton and all of their subsidiaries. That is the fascism. That's the merger of corporation and state that doesn't get discussed. You can stand on a podium every day for years on end and decry money in politics, but unless you are trying to end that union of corporation and state at a functional everyday workplace related level, you're not going to end this cycle of corporate and state rule.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And you're right about the use of the term fascism. It's used so frequently now, and it's used very incorrectly, and it kind of takes away from the true meaning of it. And again, I hate to go back to language that's being used, but oftentimes that's an important component when it comes to issues such as this one, especially when we're talking about the, protesters and activism and people rising up against their own government. But I think what is extremely interesting too, and this is kind of, expected, is that, we're seeing these countries basically they're using their military against their own people, and just an overreaction, declaring states of emergency. In Ecuador, they moved the government in the capital of the country elsewhere, and it's all which is, I know.
Now that's some fucking cartoonish shit right there,
isn't it? It is.
By the way, our capital city and our government decided that they preferred their winter quarters, so we just don't pay any attention to anything that happened. We just this is where our capital is now, and it happens to be the place where most of you can't get to us. That's just a happy coincidence.
Yeah. And you know what? I would be, and I keep going back to what took place in Ecuador because I think it's important to look at what's happened in other countries to kind of predict maybe potentially what could unfold in others. I wouldn't be surprised if there is American officers or personnel on the ground right now in in Santiago and in Chile. I think again, I'm speculating, but we know in the past that this has been something that happens, and I think it's highly likely that there are probably provocateurs or at least intelligence that is on the ground that has absolutely no right to be there.
100%. Um, Before we wrap up, if anyone in audience land, in chat land, has anything that they want to ask either me or Taylor, please go ahead and do that. Um,
Yeah, I
Ruben
love taking questions. They're
Ruben
fun to answer.
Garcia. Resistant shills are now claiming to be socialists, but will never push any activism beyond generic identity politics nonsense. I, um, well, that's where that's where green capitalism comes in too, because it's cool now to go on climate strike, which
Yeah.
involves no pressure on your legislators whatsoever. It involves no divestment or boycotting of or sanctions on. I guess in this place it would be industry that is responsible to whatever degree they are for damaging the environment. Um, it's a feel good thing right now. You know, so I would include that. Um,
Yeah, I
you
agree. It
can't
is like
post a
a
link
trendy
in
thing to
here.
do.
You can't post a link in here. Solitary Reaper. YouTube only allows uh, chat moderators or admin to post leaks. Um, what's the hardest part of your job?
Um, I don't know. You know what? It's really not too uh, difficult right now. I would say maybe just trying to reach other people who maybe are more willing to adhere to um, corporate talking points in trying to get people to not view you as being crazy or having three heads. So, at least from an activist perspective, talking to people and just trying to get them to who maybe don't know who Julian Assange is or who have a disdain towards him to try to get them on your side. That could be kind of difficult, but you get over it quickly. As far as the journalism aspect, I would just say maybe access at this point. And also beating like a censorship. I think our Free Assange vigils and Action for Assange in general on Twitter is um, pretty censored. But again, those are all such small matters compared to what other people have to experience. So I don't even like to, complain about it really. But I think just reaching people who don't hold um, similar viewpoints and aren't willing to learn more.
The hardest part of my job is well, I don't consider this a job. But the hardest part about you know doing these shows, to me at least, um is reminding myself that we are all on a fucking journey. We're all on a path, because I tend to, when I am critical of someone, um, I tend to not give them that benefit of the doubt. And I feel like it may be a disservice to, especially when I go after independent media, like when when I go after somebody else who has a show, I kind of forget that I tell you guys and I tell me that we're all on a path. But I assume that they should know, and I don't know if that's necessarily the case. So yeah, remembering that we all started at some place and we're definitely going further, hopefully. You know, and being consistent about that and being honest about that is hard for me. It is. I saw something for, okay, cannabis sativa. You guys were talking about how Bernie would have to rule via executive order with everything so skewed to the right in America. I feel he has no choice. Is flipping state governments a better bet? It is. I feel that, you know, governing by executive order is kind of a political suicide. I mean, if you think that media has been hostile to Trump, how do you think the spin is going to look when, you know, radical socialist Bernie Sanders dictates policy through executive order? And like how many how obstructionist the Congress will become if he can't, you know, like it's a damned if you do and damned if you don't. I flipping state governments, I mean, I suppose my answer always is do what you can do to make your community as sustainable as possible without government reliance. Because this is a fucking rigged process ran by a national security state, and we don't really get a say, even though we get to feel like we participated.
Yeah, so again, too, this kind of goes back to the idea that this is very much a rigged process and we don't really have a whole lot of say. But Steve, what you were saying about the governing through executive orders, I mean, I remember at the beginning of Trump's presidency when he was passing a lot of or signing a lot of executive orders, that was met with hostility from the media. I think that with Sanders, especially his identifying as a democratic socialist, that would be met with maybe even greater hostility because, you know, people on the right and neoliberals and more moderate Democrats on the left would say, or on the left, they're really not on the left, but they would argue, oh, look, he's, you know, overreaching his power. This is he wants to expand his abilities in the government, et cetera. So I think that that's a good point to be made there. So I think that the media would not be too kind to him. So especially you can't, go ahead.
I like, okay, great. Like, you're not, even if Bernie walked in fucking dick swinging, zero fucks given about ruling by executive order, had no qualms doing it, if you don't have a friendly state government, those individual state governments are going to sue, or they're going to block implementation, or they're going to do this. There's a million ways that you can combat an executive order at the state or federal level. Congress holds the purse strings. Bernie Sanders can say Medicare for all starts today, and this is how it happens, and this is what's going down, and he can demand it through executive order. But if it's a government program that has to be paid for, Congress and Congress alone has the authority to determine whether or not the money actually goes into the right accounts.
Right, and this is on a separate issue, but I worry with all of that, I worry that it's going to shift if we do, and maybe not with the Sanders presidency, but with if another Democrat wins, I don't see us getting Medicare for all.
Oh, fuck no.
By any means. There's no way. What we would get is maybe no change at all because it'd be blocked by Congress, or we would have that mixed system where there's still private insurance and Medicare for all, which is
Yeah. And I 100% believe that Bernie is sincere about Medicare for all. I 100% believe that it is, you know, a signature piece of legislation that he wants done as immediately as possible if he's allowed to become president. What I don't believe is that he's going to get through this primary. You know, it's more rigged now than it was in 2016 against him. Almost impossibly, but so much more rigged. And I just, we are inarguably going into another financial collapse. That shit's happening. Billions and billions and billions of dollars has been getting pumped into banks. We're about to see a lot of defaults on auto loans, where new construction around here is slowed down a lot. People aren't opening their fucking wallets to do the sort of you know, general property maintenance, let alone remodels and shit like that, like they were a couple of years ago. And I think that if the economy collapses before the general election, there's no way in hell Bernie Sanders gets that nomination, even if fucking everything goes right and they suddenly stop rigging it. I think that the reaction of an America who has been raised to fear everything would be that a steadier, more neoliberal hand would be the right way to go about fixing this economic situation that Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone was responsible for. And I think that's how it would be spun, and I think that's how it would be sold. But I don't think that we're getting out of an economic collapse. I don't. You don't pump $400 billion, $500 billion into different fucking reserve banks because everything's going all right. You don't. And that's happened in the last like month and a half. Is that $500 billion has just appeared. You know, because the Fed needed to saturate banks with it to make it look like they had cash on hand so they could fucking keep the shell game going. It was essentially what... Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's being predicted that within the next few months, we are going to be experiencing an economic collapse. It's imminent, so it is...
Where's that coming from? Because I'll do a whole show on it later today. Who's predicting that?
I'll send you some information on it, but yeah. But I think that's been the consensus within a few months. And when I say few months, not like 2 months, but like within 6.
I mean, I honestly thought it would be here before now. I really did. The way that the way that they can just pump billions of dollars into the American economy to artificially inflate it makes me wonder whether or not they would let Bernie Sanders get the election just to fucking tank the economy on his watch over the fucking, you know, market reaction to the idea of maybe having the poor suffer marginally less.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting.
I
It's
mean,
quite scary to see how calculated things are, but I don't think that's a far-fetched prediction.
we're sitting here watching in real time an economy be artificially inflated. We watch this shit happen on an international scale. This is something that, shit, dude. The Confederacy tried to do the exact same thing when they were printing their own money and were in dire economic straits. Like, you can only keep that parlor trick going for so long. And all it really takes is a little bit more awareness or a little bit less fear to get people activated. And I don't see a governmental solution to a lot of things. I don't know if we can legislate our way out of this sort of economic mentality. I don't. Like it's
No, I don't think so. And I think looking back in history, it suggests that real change has been initiated from people's efforts on the ground versus, um, you know, actual people being elected into office and making change. The only time that does happen is usually when it usually is a negative. If somebody's elected into office and there's a drastic change, it's usually more so for the negative. But as far as positive change, it usually comes from the people at the bottom.
no,
I know we talk about that a lot.
well, because there are so many people who think that the political process is the right way to go about doing it, or that getting out in the streets for something other than a feel-good parade is the exact wrong approach, and
Yeah.
there's never a right way to protest against a totalitarian state. There's never a right way to speak your mind about a fucking, a government that is the PR firm for the national security state and America's homegrown oligarchs. The and so fuck it. Like, I'm gonna talk about it. I'm going to encourage other people to get out and get active and get organized in a way that gives you, I don't know, a semblance of security that you're not being infiltrated. Like, we talk about decentralized activism all
Yeah.
the time, and I can't stress that approach enough. Yes, there is going to have to be millions of people in the streets marching for the same purpose at some point. In the meantime, do what you can to protect yourself and fucking if you go to a rally or a protest, don't go by yourself, bring a buddy and stick with your buddy and make sure that you hang out and talk to your buddy. And if you're engaging in other people, engaging with other people, make sure that either you or your buddy is not talking when you or your buddy is talking, so that you can observe the people around you and determine whether or not you're talking to a real person or a fucking agent, you know?
Yeah.
Like, there's so many different ways and steps that you can do this, but I am way over time, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Taylor, thank you again for hanging out, for showing up on short notice. I really appreciate it. You extra miled the fuck out of it, and thank you. And please tell the good folks where to find you. And
Yeah,
what you've
thanks
got
for having
going
me on. Huh?
I said, and what you've got going on. Tell them where to find
Okay.
you and what you're up to.
Okay. Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, it's always cool to be on here and have these talks. Of course, you can find me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak. And then also you can follow Action for Assange on Twitter at action_4 And then also check out our free Assange Vigil series. Steve and I co-host the free Assange Vigils with Andrew Smith and Christy Doff. That is held on Wednesday evenings at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Action, the number 4, Assange YouTube channel. And if you do miss an episode, we of course upload them and we have them archived. So do tune into that and watch us. I'm sure that many of you do. And then also, if you are interested in the intelligence agencies and how they operate, I encourage, and you are passionate about that, and you're passionate about journalists' right to publish and free speech, I encourage everybody to start following the One versus Five Eye campaign, which is all about one woman, journalist and activist Susie Dawson, taking on the Five Eyes. The Five Eyes is basically an interconnected network of intelligence agencies among 5 Western countries. That's the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, which is Susie's country of origin. And she is taking them on because they targeted her for her work and for her journalism. And she is not alone in this. This happens to many journalists, activists, whistleblowers, and political dissidents around the world. They end up being targeted by intelligence agencies. And so she is taking this on. And her fight against them will help set a very important legal precedent to ensure that this does not happen to other individuals. So make sure that you do follow her campaign on Twitter at the number 1 BS, the number 5, the letter I. For more information on that, you can visit oneversus5i.com, and then also join the Discord server where you can work with Susie directly to further the campaign, to bring awareness to the campaign at oneversus5i.com/Discord. And then also tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Susie's YouTube channel, Susie 3D. She is going to be holding her weekly One versus Five Eye teach-ins, where she talks about how the intelligence agencies operate and specifically how they target individuals. It's information that you are not going to find anywhere else. So I do encourage everybody to check that out. Again, that's tonight, Sunday, every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And thanks so much for having me on again. I always enjoy these chats.
Hell yeah. I will be doing some stuff with Patreon this afternoon, and then I will be deleting all of the Patreon clips that I have on YouTube, re-uploading the full episodes of those, listing those as private, and putting them all on the Patreon, because Patreon did something really weird where they took away all of my full-length videos and only put up the clips that I had on YouTube. And then, Friday at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern Time, I will be live with Elizabeth Voss. Next Sunday, I'm moderating a debate between Nico House and Yellow Vest America, because I'm a dumbass and I offered to. And yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much. I love you all. This has been Slow News Day. I'm Steve Poikinen, and good luck to us all.